So let's start right here in the American League. So this is right now where the division kind of sits, right? So last year you saw the Twins, they were the clear favorite in the division. The Tigers kind of overtook the Guardians, which I don't know that a lot of people expected. I think a lot of people expected more from Cleveland last year, even if it wasn't much more, it was a little bit more. Them finishing it at 76 and 86. And then you had two teams at the bottom of the standings last year. I think a lot of people were surprised with the White Sox, given the kind of buildup that they've had um, as they've started building their team. You had two teams at the bottom of this division with over 100 losses. Now, Pacoda's now projecting at this point for two teams over 500. It's going to be Minnesota at the top of the division, with Cleveland following them only a game behind. And then it's Detroit, Kansas City, and Chicago. Chicago, the only team that is under 70 wins on the season. Listen, Dalton, I think you and I can kind of expect at this point, this is a relatively ugly division. We touched on it briefly before. It's why I think Pablo Lopez is such a great bet for the American League Cy Young. But here's the thing. I think you and I can both agree that Minnesota is the better team in the division. But just how good do you think they can be generally in the American League, competing with teams like the Yankees and the Astros and the Rangers and Baltimore and whoever else? You know, how good do you think they can be? We'll take a peek at their lineup right now. What do you think about what they've done over the offseason, and what do you think their season outlook is going to look like?
Well, I think Minnesota is in a nice spot because they are clearly, as you said, they're clearly the best team in a not so great division. So I think they can kind of figure out what they have with some of these guys as time goes along. And what's exciting for them is the offensive flashes that they've seen from some of these lesser known guys. I mean, just because I'm somebody who watches the Twins a lot, man, Edouard Julien, Royce Lewis, Matt Wallner, Alex Kirilloff, like these are dudes who are a lot better hitters than most people realize. And you're mixing them in with, obviously Buxton, it's a health question with him, right? But he's looked great this spring. I think it's a spring in his step that he's back in center field. Correa kind of is what he is. Kepler kind of is what he is. Santana, same type of deal. Jeffers is a pretty good hitter. What I like is there's not a single guy when I look at that lineup who has no offensive upside.
Yeah.
Every single hitter in that lineup has offensive upside. It's not like, I mean, you look at a lot of the teams in that division, and there are 4 or 5 guys you're trotting out there who you're like, man, I hope he can be replacement level. The Twins, I think, have well above replacement level hopes for virtually everybody in their lineup. So it's a really deep team offensively. Pitching wise, Pablo Lopez and Joe Ryan is a great way to start a rotation. Now, after that, Bailey Ober has looked, I think, better than even the Twins thought he'd be. If Bailey Ober can continue to be a steady guy in that rotation the way he's been, that'd be a huge plus for them. The back end's a little shaky. I don't know how much you can really trust Louis Varland or Chris Paddock. We'll see if Jordan Balazovic ends up getting back involved in that as well. I know for a long time he was a pitching prospect they were really high on. I think if Minnesota is where we think they'll be come the deadline, that's a team that will be going after pitching. So I think by the time you get to October, that pitching staff will probably look a little bit better. Yohan Duran at the back end of that bullpen is a ridiculously good closer, so that helps. I think that bullpen's not great, but above average with a really good shutdown guy at the back end. I think Minnesota is pretty above average everywhere, not really great anywhere. And in the AL Central, that's more than good enough.
Yeah.
You talk about, well, where do they land with teams like Houston and Texas and the Yankees? I mean, it doesn't really matter now, right? I mean, as long as they can just cruise to a division title and get in, that's what this is all about, right? Like, just roll into the wild card round. You just got to beat somebody 2 out of 3. Then you got to beat somebody 3 out of 5, right? We saw it last year with Arizona. You don't have to be the best team to just kind of find your way through the playoffs. Like, playoffs, you're going to hear me talk about this a lot this season. Playoff series in baseball are tiny, borderline meaningless samples. Like, guys' playoff numbers, I think, get way over talked about. Teams' playoff histories get way over talked about. These samples are tiny. You just got to get hot for a week. The Pittsburgh Pirates can get hot for a week. So I think, once the Twins get there, I think they like their chances because it's baseball.
Yeah, no, hey, that's true. I think one of the big keys in that lineup, and listen, he was, we both know that I think he's going to be playing with a bit of a chip on his shoulder this year. Carlos Correa was really disappointing last year. I mean, he had a really poor season for Minnesota after, again, once again hitting the free agent market and kind of striking out, right? He originally has the deal with the Giants. That goes south, right? Failed physical. Then he signs that massive contract with the Mets. That goes south. And then now he's just, all right, I'm back in Minnesota for a contract that I didn't really want. And then he underproduces. And so I just think that there's going to be a little bit of a chip on his shoulder as far as that is concerned. So let's take a little bit of a look at deeper in this division. We'll kind of get through some of these teams. The Guardians, I think, are a really interesting team. I don't know, what their ceiling is. I think the top of their lineup is actually very intriguing. Stephen Kwan, I love at the top of this lineup just as a contact traditional leadoff guy. Andres Jimenez, I think, has done a really good job as far as living up to his hype as a former Met prospect. He was pretty highly touted. And again, one of the guys that one of the better players in baseball that doesn't get talked about enough because he plays for Cleveland and quite frankly, in a fairly, I don't want to say irrelevant, but a fairly, not as exciting division is Jose Ramirez. I mean, he's just an unbelievably good player and a fantastic offensive player. This is a team that I think is almost aging in the wrong direction. I don't know how much their future provides here. Bieber is getting older. He's getting more injured. I don't want to spend too much time on these lower level AL Central teams. I'll say it for now, but let's.
Well, Mike,
What do you have to say here?
Mike, I'm glad to hear you say that I'm glad to hear you say lower level AL Central team, because that's what the Guardians are now, in my opinion. I think this team's ass. I really do. If you want to go ahead and pull their roster back up, I mean,
yeah,
that lineup, like Jose Ramirez is a stud, right? Josh Naylor can hit a bit, but I think we've seen his ceiling. You're telling me, I mean, like you talk about the back end of the Padres lineup. 5 through 9 here: Ramon Laureano, Bo Naylor, Kyle Manzardo, Gabriel Arias, Miles Straw. Like, yeah, there might be some upside with some of these younger guys, but what is there to be excited about here? Like, this is a well below average lineup. Stephen Kwan is fine, right? I mean, I'm not like saying he's terrible. Andres Jimenez is fine, a good defender, whatever. But there's nothing to be excited about here. This is a team that is going to have to get on base and be they're going to need a whole bunch of guys to outperform what they're projected to be if they want to finish in the top half of this division, in my opinion. The rotation, Shane Bieber has been very slowly regressing over time. All the numbers suggest that regression should continue. I think they should have traded him last year. I think that you're going to see that regression continue this year. Tanner Bybee is fine. Logan Allen is just a guy. Carlos Carrasco is awful. Tristan McKenzie is the only bright spot for me there. And again, you have health questions there with him coming off so many injuries. Gavin Williams already hurt. So the big strength for Cleveland is the pitching, and the pitching is not that great. Clase at the back of the bullpen for now until he gets traded. I think this team is 15, 20 games under by the deadline. I think they trade away Bieber. I think they trade away Clase. Wow. They're not going to finish second in that division. So, I mean, I know we're looking at them second because they did that last year, and Pacoda says blah, blah, blah about them winning 86 games or 84 games, whatever it says.
Yeah, right.
I mean, stop. They're not a good ball club. Who I do think is going to get better is Detroit. I think Detroit is taking real steps forward this year. For this rotation, look, Jack Flaherty's not what he once was, but this is still a solid starting pitcher. Tariq Skubal is a budding star. He's somebody else who I considered talking about in the Cy Young segment, but he's sitting there at 9-1. There's no value there. But some of these other guys, like Alex Fado, looked okay last year. Reese Olson looked decent last year. Casey Mize was a number 1 pick, right? There's plenty of potential there, plenty of potential with Matt Manning. The upside with this pitching staff goes pretty deep to the point where if 1 or 2 of these last 4 names are decent, that's a really solid rotation in a bad division. So I think they're going to pitch their way to, past the Guardians. Look, the lineup here, I'm not going to argue that the lineup here is great. But
There's
Jake
a lot of
Rogers.
upside in this lineup, though, too. I mean, you look at it, there's like legitimately like 5 guys who are on the younger side in this lineup that have real upside, right? You're looking at like Parker Meadows, Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson. I think we're kind of waiting for Spencer Torkelson to finally pop off a little bit. Kerry Carpenter's already been a relatively productive big leaguer, and I know that they're really
Yeah,
excited about Colt Keefe as well. So there's a
yeah,
lot of upside in this lineup too.
there is. I mean, I think they have. I'll put it this way: like I talked about how the Twins have go 9 guys deep with guys that they think can be above average offensive players. Tigers aren't quite there, but I think they go probably 7 or 8 guys deep with guys that they at least think have offensive upside. Now, Javier Baez is the
I was waiting
albatross
for
in the
that.
room, the guy they're paying $25 million who can't hit a baseball.
Oh
Um,
God.
I think Baez is a guy that they ought to just ship away and see if they can get a prospect of any kind for, or maybe some cash for, to some team that's
Yeah.
desperate at
I don't know
shortstop.
that anybody would take him. I just
I
don't.
don't, I don't think so either. But so that, like, I'll put it this way: the Tigers aren't going to be good, but the division's bad, so they can win 84 games. That's how I look at
Yeah,
it.
hey, well, look, that's kind of the impression that I get too. I mean, Pacoda has them at 76 and 86, actually worse than what they were last year, and I don't know that I agree. I just like you're getting another year out of younger players, and like I said, I agree. I think this division is a little bit it is bad. Let's talk about Kansas City for a minute because they were actually pretty active this offseason, especially as far as pitching were concerned. Now look, they did not make moves that are groundbreaking, right? These are what I would call just kind of like foundational, fill in the roster kind of moves, right? Maybe a start of a building process when they signed Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha. I think that that's one thing. They really saw a lot of great things out of Cole Reagans last year. That's a really nice young and up and coming pitcher. And then you look at this lineup, and again, this is not something that you're to write home about, but there are several players I think in this lineup, especially when you talk about obviously Bobby Witt Jr. speaks for itself, but guys like Vinny Pasquantino, guys like Nick Prado, I think are guys that you can say, all right, hey, listen, we have a future, right? We have a plan in place
Yeah,
for the future for Kansas City. Where do you kind of see them stacking up? Obviously, we see Minnesota at the top, but and this is kind of the way it is for the rest of this division. I feel like for the rest of this division, it's going to be like, okay, who's got the brightest future going forward, right? It'll be kind of a semi in division competition between Detroit and Kansas City, but Kansas City's got a pretty intriguing young team coming up.
yeah. I mean, I think Kansas City is going to be better than Cleveland. To give you
It's
a talk
something.
about Cleveland. I think
Sure.
Cleveland's gonna fall apart. I mean, that
Yeah.
I now look, I've been wrong on Cleveland before, and we'll see. I'll eat crow if I am, but I think Cleveland's gonna kind of bottom out here. And I think Kansas City
Mhm.
comes up, finishes third in this division. I think Kansas City is the team that finishes 76 wins, 75 wins. Like they're not an average team yet, but they're a team that's kind of starting their ascent. I think they're
Yeah.
kind of like what we saw with Detroit last year. Cole Reagans is a stud. Michael Wacha provides them another solid starter. Seth Lugo is perfectly serviceable. Brady Singer is perfectly serviceable. Jordan Lyles is a dumpster fire, but we'll see what happens with that 5 spot. The lineup, like you said, there are some things to be excited about here. Vinny Pasquantino coming back healthy. Salvador Perez is still Salvador Perez somehow. Hunter Renfroe is a offensively productive player. Bobby Witt Jr. is a stud. And guys like Michael Garcia and Kyle Isbell are interesting. So I think there's enough here that in a bad division they're going to be at least competitive. I don't
Yeah.
think they're a playoff team yet, but I think they're kind of like a year away from being a year away. Like they're kind of on that
Yeah.
path. So if I'm a Royals fan, I'm like, hey, we're moving. We're actually moving in a direction.
Yeah.
So like I'll put it this way: they're not bringing back Zach Greinke, and I mean I love Zach Greinke, but they're not bringing him back out and rolling him out there every fifth day.
Yeah.
I think they're a team that's actually moving in a direction, so good for them.
Yeah.
The same can't be said about the last team in this division. I really don't want to spend a lot of time on the Chicago White Sox if we can
Yeah.
help it, Mike.
Yeah.
This team's awful. I mean,
Yeah.
they're They're forcing Garrett Crochet into the rotation. They're going to make him their opening day starter. Good luck with that, right? It's kind of like the Jordan Hicks thing in San Francisco, where it's like I don't think you really need to mess with it. The guy throws fucking flames. Like I think it's kind of weird, but I mean, other than that, if you look at the rest of this rotation, Fetty, Soroka, Flexen. I mean, Soroka, maybe there's something left in the tank. Flexen
Agreed.
is what he is. Nick Nastrini, former Dodgers prospect. There's some talent there, but again, we're talking real young guy here, not a lot of experience. And Tuki Toussaint, his days as a prospect are well behind him. Uh, the lineup is, you look at the lineup and there are some names there, but we know what this team is. They're not very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, you're right. They're definitely not. I mean, as far as you and I had said this from the beginning, is that this is a team that could very easily make absolutely zero progress um, going into next year. This is not a tremendously young team either. I mean, they have a lot of veteran players. I mean, Andrew Benintendi, as far as disappointment was concerned, I mean, Andrew Benintendi was awful for a lot of last year. The top of this lineup can, and that's a key word here, can be interesting, right? With Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez, Andrew Vaughn, whoever. But I agree with you. I think that there's just not a lot of room for upside or excitement when it comes to the White Sox. I think they're
Yeah, let's
clearly
let's move on. We don't need to talk about the Chicago White Sox anymore.